Daniel woke up to the alarm clock ringing at the usual time. From the outside, his life looked pretty normal, maybe even enviable. A well-located apartment, a stable job at a logistics company, friends who messaged him in the football group chat. Everything seemed fine. The problem was the space between what people saw and what was actually going on inside. Daniel brushed his teeth. He stared at his own reflection with that look of someone who recognizes himself but kind of wishes he didn't. For months now, his morning routine had a silent ritual, mentally calculating how much he owed and how much longer he could stall before making the next payment. He picked out a light-colored dress shirt, applied a generous layer of deodorant, and took a deep breath. His phone was already buzzing with notifications. One from the office group chat, another from the bank, and a third he purposely ignored. It was from an unknown number, but Daniel already knew where it was from. That tight knot in his stomach was part of the routine now. At breakfast, he made a point of looking cheerful, turned on the news, laughed alone at a bad joke, and ate 2 slices of toast like he was actually hungry. It was all acting. Inside, his mind was spinning. His bank account was overdrawn, his credit card maxed out, and the overdraft limit had become a distant memory. All because of a string of bets that, at first, seemed harmless. His first contact with online betting sites had been almost a joke among friends, a weekend pool, a few small wins, and a false sense of control. But control had left the building a long time ago. Now, the bets happened late at night, alone, eyes glued to his phone screen, swearing that this time would be the last, always the last. He grabbed his keys and headed to work. In the elevator, he rehearsed smiles and small talk responses in case anyone started a conversation, but no one did. Better that way. The last thing Daniel wanted that morning was social interaction. When he reached the parking lot, he froze. A crumpled envelope stuck under the windshield wiper. Plain paper, folded, with just one handwritten sentence. "We'll be in touch soon." Daniel glanced around, heart racing. No sign of anyone nearby. He shoved the note in his pocket and tried to take a deep breath, started the car and drove to work like nothing had happened. But inside, the biggest enemy was already on full attack. During the drive to work, Daniel kept both hands steady on the wheel, but his mind was elsewhere. The radio played an upbeat song about second chances and fresh starts, but he didn't hear a word. All he could think about was the note in his pocket and the calls he'd been ignoring for days. Funny or tragic how it had all started so small. A $50 bet here, 100 there. Always with the illusion that it was just for fun, just entertainment. He arrived at the office on time, as always, greeted his coworkers with an automatic smile, cracked a joke by the coffee machine, even commented on the traffic. No one there had a clue he was one step from falling apart. At his computer, he opened the company's shipment tracking spreadsheet and tried to focus. But each filled cell felt like a reminder of everything in his life that was completely out of control. Every so often, he opened a private browser tab, just to check the day's betting odds, just to see if that ridiculous bet from last night still had a chance of turning things around. It was always just to check, never just that. His desk phone rang, the manager asking for an urgent report. Daniel answered quickly, but when he hung up, he realized his hands were shaking. He closed his eyes for a few seconds and made that same internal promise he'd made 100 times before. Today I'm done. For real this time, I swear. Another lie to himself. At lunchtime, instead of eating with his coworkers, he went out alone, walked to a nearby park, sat on a bench, and stared at nothing. Pulled out his phone and, almost on autopilot, opened the betting app. The balance, practically zero. But the temptation to deposit more, to win back what he'd lost, was a constant buzz in his head. He thought about the day he'd borrowed money from Richard, an old acquaintance from high school who now worked in what he called financial solutions. But Daniel knew exactly what that meant. When he asked for the loan, he swore it was just this once, that he'd win, pay back, and be done with it. Of course, that's not how it went. Now the deadlines were long past. Richard had that calm demeanor of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be terrifying. Just a look, a short sentence, a handwritten note left on a windshield. Daniel took a deep breath, put his phone away, and went back to the office. Spent the rest of the afternoon convincing himself he could fix it all on his own, that he was strong enough to get out of this alone without telling anyone. Little did he know the enemy he needed to beat wasn't outside. It was sitting right there, inside his own head, wearing a cynical grin, waiting for the next slip. Night fell earlier than Daniel would have liked. The workday ended, lights turned off one by one, and he was among the last to leave. He was stalling, avoiding going home, dreading the silence of his own apartment, the credit card bill on the fridge door, the empty bank account, and most of all, his own reflection. He sat in the car in the company parking lot, staring at the steering wheel, started the engine, drove aimlessly around a few blocks, like movement could somehow delay the inevitable. Then the phone vibrated. Unknown number. Again. This time he answered. Hello? On the other end, a deep, unhurried voice. Daniel. You're hard to reach, huh? His heart jumped. That voice, Richard. No yelling, no direct threats. Just that tone that left no room for misunderstanding. I'm sorting it out. I'll pay you. Just need a few more days. Daniel stammered, hating how shaky he sounded. Richard let out a short, dry laugh. Yeah, I've heard that one before. And you know, I'm a patient guy. But patience has limits. Just calling to remind you that by tomorrow, end of day, I want an answer. Anything else, we'll handle it differently. The call ended before Daniel could say another word. He sat there, phone in hand, staring at the screen like it might offer some kind of escape. Thought about calling someone. A friend, a sibling, anyone. But pride got in the way. How would he even explain this? That he owed $20,000 to a loan shark because of online betting? He drove home like a zombie, dropped his bag on the floor and went straight to his computer, opened the betting site almost on autopilot. The balance was pathetic, but he still had an old credit card that worked for online purchases. Thought about it for 2 seconds, just 2. Typed in the card details, made the deposit, picked a random basketball game he didn't even care about, and bet. Irrational? Absolutely. But at that moment, it felt like the only way to quiet the anxiety, to bet on the impossible, to try and turn $200 into $2,000 with a miracle shot. While the game played out, he sat there, eyes glued to the screen, like his whole life depended on that scoreboard. And deep down, maybe it did. The game's result was predictable. Another loss. Daniel slammed the laptop shut, as if that could erase the negative balance, the maxed-out credit card, and especially the $20,000 he owed Richard. He sat there for several minutes, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Tried to breathe deeply, but only managed a shallow, shaky sigh. The night dragged on and sleep didn't come. He tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers. Instead, the opposite came, a flood of thoughts that made everything worse. How had he let it get this far? When exactly did he lose control? He vaguely remembered when this had felt like harmless fun. Now, all he felt was panic and shame. Around 3 a.m, his phone vibrated again. Another message. Unknown sender. Just one short sentence. Remember the deadline. Daniel jolted upright, walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stood there staring at the cold light like it could help him think straight. Grabbed a water bottle, but his hands were shaking so badly he spilled half of it on the floor. Back in his room, he opened his laptop and impulsively started searching. How to get out of gambling debt. How to stop betting. Help for compulsive gamblers. Dozens of results popped up. Support groups, online meetings, forums. He skimmed a few paragraphs, then closed the tabs. His mind was a battlefield. One side begging for help. The other whispering, "Relax. Tomorrow you'll figure it out. Just make one big bet and fix everything." That inner enemy had a voice, and it was convincing. At dawn, he went to work without a single minute of sleep. Dark circles under his eyes, heavy head, but the same fake smile for coworkers. Throughout the day, he barely focused on anything. The fear of running into Richard outside the building, or worse, at his front door, sat like a weight on his chest. In the afternoon, an email from his credit card company. Limit exceeded. More missed calls from unknown numbers. He ignored them all, pretended everything was fine. That day, for the first time, a different kind of thought crossed his mind. What if I just disappear? Leave everything behind? But even that didn't seem like a real way out. He knew, no matter where he went, the problem would follow, because the enemy lived inside. The next morning, Daniel woke up to the doorbell ringing. First a short buzz, then another, more insistent. He jumped out of bed, heart pounding, glanced at the clock, just after 7. Who shows up this early? Peeking through the side window, he spotted a black car parked across the street. 2 men leaned against it, arms crossed. One wearing a cap, scrolling on his phone. The other, Richard. No doubt, Daniel's stomach turned. For a second, he considered hiding, pretending he wasn't home. But the doorbell rang again. Longer, firmer, the kind of ring that doesn't accept being ignored. He opened the door, forcing the most neutral expression he could manage. "Hey, Daniel," Richard said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk." Daniel swallowed hard, opened the door a little wider, gestured for him to come in. Richard declined with a simple wave. "Here's fine." He glanced around, taking in the surroundings. The conversation was short. Richard said he'd been patient, reminded Daniel that the deadline had passed, told him in no uncertain terms that the next steps would be less pleasant. No shouting, no direct threats, but the tone left no room for doubt. Before leaving, Richard handed him a new note. Just a number, written by hand. $20,000. The debt, now with added interest. Daniel stood there in the doorway, paper in hand, legs shaky. Stumbled back inside like he'd been punched. Sat on the living room floor, staring into space. His head spun. Thought about selling his car, but it was already tied up with the bank. Thought about a formal loan, but his credit was wrecked. Thought about asking family for help. But just imagining the questions, the disappointment in their eyes, made his face burn with shame. He stood up, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and stared at himself in the mirror. Red eyes, tired expression, and one thought looping in his head. How did I become this person? Sitting on the bathroom floor, back against the cold wall, Daniel cried. For real this time. That cry was short, controlled, but different from all the others in recent months. It wasn't self-pity, or just regret over another lost bet. It was the cry of someone finally realizing the real fight wasn't against Richard, or the betting sites, or his bank balance. It was against himself. He spent the next few minutes on the bathroom floor, breathing deeply, trying to organize his thoughts. Remembered an old conversation with a coworker who had struggled with alcohol. Daniel vaguely recalled hearing about support groups, meetings, people coming together to talk about this exact thing, the enemy within. On impulse, he grabbed his phone, opened the browser, typed, "Support group for gambling addiction." Several results popped up. In-person meetings, online groups, discussion forums. He read testimonials from people in the exact same spot, drowning in debt, ashamed, but trying somehow to find a way out. For a moment, he hovered over the close tab button, ready to do what he always did, postpone, pretend it could wait. Maybe make one more bet to solve everything in a single shot. But something inside small, weak, but stubborn stopped him. The phone vibrated again. Another message from Richard. Just one sentence. Last chance. Daniel took a deep breath. For the first time in months, he ignored the fear. He put the phone in his pocket and walked to the living room. Sat on the couch, stared at the ceiling for a few minutes, then closed his eyes. Opened one of the support group websites and noted the time for the next online meeting. It was happening that very night. All he had to do was click a link. No need to leave the house. No need to look anyone in the eye. Just show up. He knew he didn't have the strength to handle this alone. And for the first time, that felt okay. Maybe admitting that was the first real step. There was still a long road ahead. Richard was still out there. The debts were still real. But for the first time, Daniel had a real decision to make. And maybe, just maybe, this time it would be the right one. After work, when the meeting time arrived, Daniel sat on the couch with his laptop open on his lap. The screen showed the video call link, and that blue join button looked more threatening than any high-stakes bet he'd ever made. Minutes passed. He just stared at the button. Sweaty palms, heart racing. He even closed the laptop once, opened it again, sat there, staring at his own reflection on the black screen before the camera would turn on. Took a deep breath, clicked the button, and joined. The first voices started coming through. Regular people he'd never seen before, but every single one seemed to say exactly what he felt. A gray-haired man talking about his overdrawn account. A young woman admitting she'd lied to her parents about taking out loans. Another guy sharing how he borrowed money meant for his kids' school fees and blew it all on last-minute bets. Daniel didn't say a word during that first meeting. just listened. But little by little, his internal defenses started crumbling. Every story was a mirror. Every confession felt like someone had read the thoughts he worked so hard to hide. After the meeting, he closed the laptop gently. No feeling of victory, no magical relief, but a different kind of silence. Not the oppressive kind that haunted him every night, but a silence that felt like a beginning. A fragile, tiny space that hadn't been there before. He checked his phone. More messages from Richard. He opened a few, ignored others. For the first time, he considered replying with something different, not more excuses, but the truth. That he needed time, that he was trying to fix it, that maybe he needed help. He went to the kitchen, made a strong cup of coffee, and sat at the table with an old notebook. Started listing every single debt, name by name, amount by amount. Each number hit like a punch, but he kept writing. It was his first honest inventory of the mess he'd created. When he finished, he closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and thought, "I'm still a disaster. But at least now I know where to start." The enemy was still there, still whispering, still tempting, but now Daniel had heard another voice too. A weaker voice, but an honest one, and maybe, just maybe, that was the one that would win. That night, before bed, Daniel did something he hadn't done in months. He left his phone across the room. No notifications. No betting alerts. No threatening messages. Just silence. He lay down with a head full of worries, but, for the first time, with the feeling that maybe he wasn't completely lost. He knew the problems were still out there. Richard still wanted his money. The debts were still hanging over him. The impulse to gamble, to chase that one magical win, still buzzed at the back of his mind. But now there was something else, the memory of that meeting, of those people saying out loud the things he'd never dared to admit. The biggest enemy still lived inside him, still lurking, still waiting for the next weak moment. But now Daniel had a map, a rough, imperfect one, but a start. No guarantees. No fairy tale ending, just a first step. And for someone who'd spent so long pretending everything was fine, that was already a lot. Before closing his eyes, one last thought crossed his mind like a silent invitation. And what if this time I don't give up on myself? And you, watching this now, have you stopped to think about the enemy that lives inside you? If you liked this story, comment, share, like, and subscribe.